Hello and welcome to today's video. I'm Golden Gat. If you haven't met me before, I do some esports casting as well as some TCG content with One Piece and Pokemon. And today I got something very special. As some of you may know, I've been playing a lot of One Piece TCG lately. And I have a specific leader I love to play, which is Nico Robin. So I've decided to compile my thoughts from OP09, from a beginner's perspective, and everything that is in this video is obviously coming from my own experience, and it's going to be all my own opinion, but trust me, I put a lot of thought into this stuff, so I think you're going to want to hear it if you have any interest at all in playing this leader going forward, since I will also have some thoughts about Nico going into OP10, where you do have some new options to play around with, but we'll get there soon enough. But before we get into that, I wanted to make a quick interjection about the ban list. So this video was actually made after the ban list went live of Jinbei, Gecko Moria, Ice Age, and Raigo. So my OP10 list for Robin is actually in consideration of that and what the meta will also follow from that ban list. So stick around for all that stuff because it's pretty interesting, I think, to actually think about and kind of theory craft for that. But I also put a lot of effort into this video, so I hope you enjoy it, and if you have any feedback at all, please leave it in the comment section below. I do read every comment, and I appreciate all of your viewing experience. So, let's just get started. This is obviously going to be a pretty interesting presentation on, the state of Nico Robin in OP09. So OP09 is pretty interesting, is where she was introduced, banish. So she just gets to, every time she swings, she's always threatening to trash any of your cards, which also gets rid of triggers, so pretty important there. And then she also has a when attacking, you can trash a trigger to get a Dawn. So Nico's a leader that really values having things on curve, particularly going first and being able to get curve for her 6 Dawn turn and her 9 Dawn turn. Because if you scale once at 3 Dawn, you get to 4, and then 4 to 6. 6, you get to play out some pretty strong cards, and then you get to scale again to get to 9. It's honestly a pretty cool concept, and then at 9 you get to run Yamato, Katakuri, stuff like that. Your usual top end for any purple or yellow decks. Now, let's just get started with matchups. So, this leader, obviously, purple-yellow, not a meta deck. For sure, it's not a meta deck. I think she's pretty strong, and she definitely has her strengths with certain matchups, but there are a lot of meta matchups that are pretty difficult, and you really have to heavily tech into some of them, which is kind of what you'll see throughout my entire kind of guide here, is that I teched very heavily for the Doflamingo matchup. And crucially, for Doflamingo, you have to have a lot of removal to be able to get rid of all these 4 and 5Ks. So you'll see that my list was very catered towards that, which left things like Shanks and Bonnie uncontested. So let's see the list. Nico Robin, this is kind of what I landed on immediately, was Shanks and Bonnie were very difficult right out of the gate. Shanks playing a bit more slow of a style, but still threatening very big swings early on in the game meant I can't really counter out of the big swings with the high Dawn commitment, and as soon as stuff like 10-drop Shanks, Rayleigh, and also Monkey D. Dragon, I have a very big difficulty removing all of those big threats turn after turn. And by the time I'm online fully, I don't have the Shanks at high enough life to be KOing things with Yamato, and also I don't have the resources to be able to survive card-wise after all of that pressure. And then Bonnie, of course, being able to rest somebody is always extremely difficult to deal with. You're only going to have a couple bodies on the board, as this is purple-yellow, and you're playing pretty big bodies, so just being able to have one of your characters or leaders always rested is pretty freaking annoying. And also, if they are playing the 10-drop Doflamingo, I find that Nico Robin has a very difficult time because she's only going to have 2 or 3 bodies, and then she's going to freeze you, the leader, and 2 of your big bodies, and then that's probably enough time without healing, because unlike a Nell, I can't heal during an opponent's turn, to actually just get taken lethal. So I find that to be pretty difficult as well. So Shanks and Pluffy both have the, or not Pluffy, excuse me, Red Purple Luffy have the same kind of issue. They are effectively 6,000 power leaders. So all of my Nico Robin swings are pretty much nullified because they're at 5k. And the thing about Nico Robin is, because her her Dawn ramping is so kind of streamlined, where you need to have everything on curve. So you're playing stuff at 3 Dawn, 6 Dawn, and 9 Dawn pretty often. You don't really have the extra Dawn allotment to be able to swing at 6. And you kind of need to, because you need to start pressuring their hand. And that just makes this matchup extremely difficult for both of those. So I think they're pretty hard to win. Occasionally you'll grind out a win, but Shanks is pretty much a matchup I have not figured out yet. Smoker, difficult just because removal is very strong, and I think he has a lower chance to brick than Lucci does in this particular matchup. So I actually prefer playing against Lucci, surprisingly, over the Smoker, because that's just the nature of it. And like eventually Lucci will run out of cards, which I found to be the case, but Smoker doesn't really care as much. So yeah, I don't know, maybe I just got lucky, but that's kind of what I've noticed in that one. Nami, pretty much unplayable. We're not going into that, to be honest. And then Blackbeard. Blackbeard obviously going to be a pretty important figure going to OP10. This is after the ban list, so I'll put that out there right now. Blackbeard's very difficult to deal with, but at the same time, you can actually whittle away at his life really early on, and then also he has some hard time removing some of the bigger bodies later on. So if you could get him pretty dangerously low and really threaten his hand size, and if he doesn't see stage, I think it's actually decently winning matchup. But if he sees stage, if he sees a couple 10 beards and you're not in position to actually be able to capitalize, that could be an easy loss, because having your on plays nullified means all your big bodies don't do anything besides just be big bodies. So yeah, Boa, surprisingly, is in the losing. Over Dofi, who's in even. I know, I'll get to it. It's a little bit questionable that he's down there, but trust me, there are rationale here. So Boa plays a very similar package to Doflamingo. However, there are some key differences. Boa runs multiple copies of Gravity Blade and multiple copies of Red Rock, which I have found to be extremely difficult for Nico Robin to deal with. And also, because of her actual, leader ability, she can draw cards. So the hand pressure that I put onto a Dofi is not going to matter nearly as much as the Boa, and she's removing my stuff at a faster rate. Yes, my life is less threatened, but as soon as the 10-drop Kaido, that the removal one comes down, I have a very difficult time actually dealing with that body. So I found this matchup to be pretty difficult, because you can Gravity Blade one turn, remove my decently sized bodies, and then put down the 10-drop Kaido, and I don't have anything to swing into it. That's basically how it goes. So I haven't really found a really good solution for that matchup, so I'd say it's actually pretty difficult. Yeah, Lucci we talked about a little bit. If he doesn't see multiple Gecko Morias, I can generally squeak out a win, because Katakuri can always put Gecko Moria in life, and then I can threaten a big swing with Robin to actually KO it and send it to the trash, and then after that it's just inaccessible forever. BY, a kind of similar story. You could do something similar, but if they see multiple Geckos early on, and they have their Sabos in trash, pretty difficult matchup, but still can squeak out some wins. Charlotte Pudding's an interesting one that I put in this list. Oh yeah, by the way, this list is obviously anything that I've played against and is somewhat meta. I just placed it in here, so yeah, Charlotte Pudding, she just does the drop big character better than Robin does. And Robin can't really punish her quick enough to prevent her from playing her 10 Big Moms. When she gets to play out 10 cost yellow Big Mom, I trash an HP, she gains an HP, and she removes something. And she doesn't really have too much cost there. That is really detrimental. And eventually I will get whittled down for, especially if they get a couple Big Moms, and it's very reliable with Pudding because their Searcher is actually good. So I find that matchup to be pretty difficult. Doflamingo, so this is the most nuanced matchup with a lot of tech cards related, because if you're gonna play Nico Robin, you need to deal with this man right here. I know he's now banned with, well, he's not effectively banned with the Jinbei being taken off the table, which does actually alleviate that matchup a lot. You can really get away with murder in that now, so definitely a little bit easier nowadays. But previously, like Dofi, he floods the board so quickly, if you don't see a removal quick enough, you could really just get steamrolled, which is where the fact that I think it's even. But if you're able to survive out a bit, you can really drain the resources out of a Dofi. He can't really draw that many cards, especially if you get rid of stuff like Sengoku's on board, or Peronas, stuff like that. So really nullify some of that searching threat with the Bounce Law, because Bounce Law, you'll see, is actually a pretty good card in this matchup. So dealing with that card and then also KOing your Weevils whenever you see them is extremely important. So getting removal tools is very important. But if you go first as Robin, I think you have a decent matchup into it, because you can hit 9 Dawn with Yamato extremely early, and then after that, if you're able to get a couple more, you can really clear out the board and drain the resources. So I think it's about even 50-50, and if the Dofi's not prepped for the matchup, could really have some difficulty. So that's kind of where I placed that one. It's a little complicated, but yeah, after that, we got Sanji, Zoro, both the rushers. Generally, it's just, do I see my removal? Do I see my blocker? Stuff like that to be able to survive the early game and then be able to play out my Ace and my Yamato if I am. Great. We're looking great, and I'm able to actually play out that game very effectively. Otherwise, I get steamrolled. So 50-50 matchup in my opinion, but kind of goes both ways. Okay, Ploofy, pretty nuanced. Well, kind of nuanced. In my opinion, whoever hits the win on the dice roll will generally have a favorable matchup. That being said, Ploofy has more tools to be able to come back if he does end up second with the Luffy Taro. If he hits 3 Luffy Taros, the game's probably over. That's just how it is. Robin can't deal with that much flood of those big of bodies. So I would maybe give it a little bit over to Ploofy, but honestly, it's pretty close, so I'd still keep it in that even category. Next, we have Reiju. Have not really had to play this matchup that much, but whenever I do, generally the rush is not strong enough to be able to take me out, and then by the time I'm online, the Reiju has already exhausted a lot of resources. Yes, you have the strong combo with Judge, but I haven't really seen it executed well to the point of winning the game, because my life was just never in that much pressure. So I'd say honestly a decent matchup. But I'll put it at even just because maybe it was low rolls. You know, Reiju always about getting high rolls and stuff like that. Then we got Purple Black Luffy, which I recently lost to. Very close matchup. You can really rush Purple Black extremely quickly, and you could get his HP extremely low. But once he hits 10 Dawn, the amount of Dawn he gets extra after returning some stuff and using some of these bigger bodies is a huge nuisance, and it's very difficult to remove the big bodies once they're there. So I'd say it's about even, because he can actually survive some of that onslaught with the banish. Next I have Zanji. It's just very fast. It's kind of similar to these two, where sometimes you're able to get your removal in time, sometimes you aren't, so it just goes even. And then we got Bello Betty, which you would think is really good, but when Bello Betty really relies on triggers to keep the momentum going, having banish is extremely good. So basically what my MO in this matchup is play out my removal and just swing big with leader. Play my removal, swing big with leader. Over and over and over. Because she can't get the triggers to actually be able to sustain out. And then eventually, when you start hitting Yamato, it can be very difficult for Bello Betty to play. NL hates banish. Makes sense. You know, if you can banish that last life, he's basically going -2 cards just to stay alive, because he's losing the life card. And then on top of that, he has to trash a card to put the life back. So you're really milling his hand hard whenever you're actually swinging into life. So I think this matchup's pretty favorable. Katakuri, maybe even. It's pretty difficult to deal with the 7k swings constantly, to be honest. But if you hit your top end properly, I think you can definitely squeak out a win. Calgara, kind of similar concept, swings very quickly. The rush yellow deck, but Calgara has to be very careful, because if you're able to get rid of the setup board as Robin, you should be in the clear. Buggy, I put as winning. I had a lot of difficulty with this matchup at first, but some of my extra kind of deck changes really made it a lot easier, especially with the addition of Charlotte Lin, because you can just put everything into life, and then Buggy's out of cards, which definitely made that matchup easier, but, you know, that's very specific, and I actually had a hard time until I added Charlotte Lin to the list. So when you see my OP10 list, you may see that I might have a bit of a Buggy problem, but who really knows? Either way, let's get on to the actual set list. So I'm going to be going into this one with basically my story of where I started out, how I revamped the list. There's about 4 kind of revisions for this list that you will kind of see my thought process, and we'll go through it just to see where I ended up at the very end. So to start, this is obviously one of my first decks I ever made. So there's some questionable things going on, but I definitely believed in it, and I thought it could be pretty strong. My first deck I ever made since I started in OP09, and yeah, I just liked Nico Robin's design. The idea of yellow-purple was super appealing to me, and this was the first list I landed on. So, as you can see here, you got your staples, Nico Olvia, of course, Jaguar D. Sol, Frankie, Nami, Nico Robin, which you'll notice is at 2. I decided very early on I do not need to play more than 2 copies of this card. I have 2 Darashi, which you'll see a very interesting choice. And then on top of that, you have your staple blockers and staple purple color cards like Usohachi, the 2K, Onami, the banish/KO option, and Gadatsu, another KO option as well, with Sanji as a kind of mid-rush to try and push for game, and then Katakuri, Yamato, and Ace for top end. Now, there's one rogue card, obviously, here, which is Kikunojo, which I'll get into my rationale in a bit for that one. I'm actually going to wait on it. But this is the list I landed on, and I felt actually pretty decent. It wasn't that bad, but against some of those harder matchups I described in the previous slide, like Shanks, Bonnie, even Doflamingo, were pretty difficult because I found that Gadatsu can't reliably KO sometimes, and same for Nami when I need them to KO. Nami, I just need the cards, and Gadatsu, if they take life early on, I could really be in a pickle. I could also account this slightly to my play not being perfect, obviously, because I was still pretty new to the game, and I've improved a lot since then. I could say that for sure. So I was getting rolled over by things I probably shouldn't have. And then, yeah, on top of that, I have Darashi, which is a pretty niche option, which we'll talk about right now as we talk about what was good and what was bad about this deck and what I wanted to change going forward. So this is Darashi. If you haven't seen it before, it's a 3-cost event that you can search 2 cards, 2 triggers, and then add it to your hand and then bottom deck the rest. So it also has a trigger, which is good. So you can actually burn it with leader ability. So what worked with it is that it's a perfect 3-Don play. You basically go positive in hand at 3-Don, and you know that works out very well for you actually maintaining the hand that I said is so hard to keep, because you also need it for counter. So it gives cards in hand, which is really good. Now, the problems are that all of your top end has no trigger. So let's look at it again. No trigger on anything Sanji and above, which is pretty awkward. It means that basically you cannot draw any of your crucial win condition cards. So you end up bottom decking them and grabbing 2 trash cards that are either counter or a shitty body. So yeah, not exactly optimal. I still kept 2 in the deck, thinking it was good, until I missed the search. This last deck had 25 triggers. 25, which I think with the math means that you have a 95% chance that one of the cards is a trigger. Just one. Any one. Doesn't matter which one. You'll have at least one trigger in there 95% of the time. So when I miss the search, that means I'm going -1 card because of the Darashi. I don't get any cards back, and I bottom deck whatever I had in that hand, which will happen to be top end because that's where there's no triggers. So it would just go straight to the bottom deck, and I lost a game because of it. Because the hand I pulled out of Darashi at my 9-Dawn turn, I think, because I really needed cards, was Yamato, Katakuri, Ace, and Ace. The game was over. Right there, I just, scooped. And then, also, it's a brick in hand, which you're going to see I need counter, for sure, to be able to survive. So, what did I do in response? Yeah, I cut the card. Big whoop. It just had to go. I don't think it was solid enough of an option for me, so I cut the card. We'll see what my replacement is soon enough as we get into the next card. Usohachi. So, obviously, a staple of purple. I was running 4 in the first deck list. What worked? It's good late to, it's very good late game. I get to rest blockers for 3 Dawn, and I still have 7 Dawn up to swing bigger, which is very good. It's a 2K counter, so you can't really go wrong in that in that department. But what didn't work is more what speaks the story. It has no trigger, which means I can't burn it with leader ability if I need to. And then also, if I get it out of life, it's just a 2K, which is still pretty good. It's also a bit redundant with the 7-cost Sanji, because that's resting a 6K, or a 6 cost. and this is resting a 5 or less, and then I also get another body on the board, so I'd rather just play at the Sanji most of the time if I have it in my hand. So that's kind of a little awkward, so I don't think I needed 4. That's kind of my rationale there. And then also KOing or sending to life is often more useful, so using Katakuri, Yamato, Gadatsu, Nami all felt a little bit better for me personally to actually execute, so I decided to drop this down by 2. So I still have 2 in the deck just for the potential tech option in case I'm not seeing my Sanjis or I had to burn a Sanji early on for counter, which does happen for sure because Sanji, you'll see, is very difficult to navigate early game. Having the Dawn -1 is very difficult, so don't ask why Jaguar D Sol is here. You'll see I adjusted some numbers in this next list, so he actually was good. So what worked was that he's a body on trigger. He has a 5k for swings. 5k for swings was very important because I don't mind them KOing Jaguar D Sol. But having him be both a blocker and a 5k for swings was very important because I was having a problem where in my mid game I just don't have anything on board that can actually swing and be effective. So Sol was kind of my answer to that, and also since it has the trigger of just being able to play it, which is an insane trigger, by the way, has saved me games, has won me games, has also really staved off some really big pressure, I decided to up this by 1 copy, so it's now sitting at 3. The only problem is it's a brick, but it doesn't matter that much that it's a brick, because if I get this early on, which is when I need counter the most, you know, I can burn it for leader ability. So it's actually pretty good. Now the only downside of this card is it is 3 cost, which means that it can be bounced by 4 cost law, which has happened a ton. That's actually the card that's gotten bounced back to me the most. Luckily it's only 3 Dawn, so it's very easy to just play back again, but that's more Dawn I can commit, and once I hit my 10 Dawn turn, I really don't want to be playing out this 3 cost Jaguar D Sol, so having some way to dispose of it is pretty useful, which is where Charlotte Linlin and some of the future lists comes in. But yeah, this was definitely a good option, and that leads us straight into the revamp list. My version 2.0, which these are all things I took to locals and got destroyed with, so pretty interesting perspective. So here's my second list. Looking pretty similar. You have things such as Olvia. Shirahoshi now notably dropped down to 3 from 4. That's because I just transferred over 1 Shirahoshi over to 1 Jaguar D Sol because I said I want more bodies, and the trigger body is extremely important for a lot of matchups. You can also see a very notable gentleman over here. We got Capone Bej being introduced to the list. I swapped out 2 Usohachis for 2 Bej, so I want to keep the 2Ks. Keeping at that 12 number is very important to me. So, yeah, I did that. And then Bej is obviously very good because he's a trigger. That's the best trigger in the game. He's a 2K. Really adds a lot to the list and the dynamicness. Now, it's not going to be so reliable that I get him out of life, but really I don't need him for that. It's more just, okay, there's an off chance that it could get saved by it. Because I have so many triggers in the deck anyways, there's a lot of cards that could potentially save a game. And having the option of still resting if I have to burn the Sanjis earlier, I feel like is still valuable, so I only put it up to 2, and I don't really have too much room left in the deck unless I want to cut some other stuff that I feel is a little bit more important. So, that's pretty much most of the changes, but you'll also notice down here I have You're the One Who Should Disappear. I actually added 2 copies here in exchange for the Darashi, so it was basically a 2 for 2 on that one because I was noticing anytime I play Ace, frick, I can't use Gum Gum Giant, which obviously Gum Gum Giant did not get banned. So we get to keep playing with this card, and Robin is not instantly dead on arrival. I think if Gum Gum got banned, this leader would be unplayable. Which is the unfortunate truth that that card will get banned eventually, and Robin will have consequences. But somehow, some way, that is not today. But yeah, the list stays pretty similar nonetheless, so not too many changes in version 2. Very slight tweaks that I think actually did improve the list. The extra body on Sol was very impactful, as well as having the 0 cost event for some of the top end shenanigans later on. But it still didn't net me that many wins, and this was a very short-lived revision, because you're going to see that I made some quick decisions to actually change out some cards right afterwards. So On the chopping block, we got Gadatsu. What worked is that he had great removal in certain matchups. So in matchups where I like to send a lot of stuff to life, great. Loved it. And also he's a 6k body that stays after the effect in a similar way to like Nami, for instance, the Egghead Nami. So I still have a 6k body to swing with. Now, the problem is it doesn't have a trigger, first of all, so that's already reducing my trigger count and also my potential life bullshit that I can pull. And then also smart players will take life early if they know you're running Gadatsu. Like Dofis will sometimes sit at 3 life instead of 4 where they usually do. Just because I'm playing Gadatsu and then suddenly, well, my strategy of using Gadatsu as a counter to Dofi is completely nullified. So, really not that great. And then also, yeah, it's just not useful in certain matchups. Teach, Shanks, and Black decks, I found it not to be that useful. And also, you see Teach just nullifies the on-play, so I'd much rather have something else, which I'm alluding to. Something else will be added. And then Black decks, of course, Lucci, they just remove this stuff afterwards. They don't really care that you KO something on board, so yeah, they just kind of brush it off like it's nothing. Shanks, I can never put enough life to actually be able to threaten any of the Beckmans, Rayleighs, Monkey D. Dragons, or the Shanks. So just forget it, you know? So Gadatsu, unfortunately, chopping block. Next, we have Sanji and Kikunojo. Kind of a combo pairing because I'm going to remove 1 copy of each from this list. So what worked with Sanji is, I think it's a great option to end a game. When someone's not really expecting it, being able to rest something and just push for game with a rusher, extremely good. Now, the problem with Sanji is obviously that he's useless early on because Dawn -1 completely destroys your curve. There have been games where I use this card and then kind of early on, like on my 9 Dawn turn, and suddenly it's just unrecuperable because I have to burn Gum Gum next turn. I'm still out of access on the Ace, stuff like that. So, yeah, sure, you can account that to misplays, but really, this is a 1k brick in hand until you get to 10 Dawn. And then you cannot use Sanji and a Gum Gum Giant in the same turn unless you want to return to 9 Dawn, which is really rough. So I actually ended up just cutting it because you can only really use it. Well, not cutting it, just reducing it by 1 because you can really only use it as an effective option to end games. And if the opponent goes tall, it doesn't really have any use. Like maybe if if they're in threat of lethal, it's pretty good. You get 1 extra swing in, but like it does not do anything to anything 9k power and above. So pretty rough. What worked for Kikunojo, which obviously is the tech option. So let me talk about my thought process for this character. I was having some difficulty very early on when I was building the deck that I don't have anything on board to swing with. So I decided to look to bodies with 6k at least, so I can maybe threaten some of those harder matchups like Shanks and also Red-Purple Luffy. Turns out that the effect is pretty limiting, but it does have really fun ramifications. So what I would do is I would play Kikunojo pretty early on in the game. As soon as they're at 3 life, you know, I'd prefer to play it then. But since it is a brick, it's just better to play it out early on. And then they could KO it if they KO it. Hey, perfect. You wasted a swing on a Kikunojo. But if I manage to get them down to 3 Dawn, or 3 life, then Kikunojo becomes a very big threat because I could swing. And if I have Katakuri in hand, I could send Kikunojo back to hand. Or no, back to life. Now I have 1 extra life to be able to tank a hit. Kikunojo is no longer exposed, and then if I do get hit, she gets brought back out of life, and she's able to swing the next turn. So she basically protects herself, and basically nullifies a swing at leader in case they're going for that, which, you know, I think is pretty solid. And then if they actually want to get rid of it, they're gonna have to KO it. But Kikunojo, let's just say, has the unfortunate fate of being bounceable by Gravity Blade. Well, not bounceable, bottom deckable by Gravity Blade, and I can't count the number of times I saw Kikunojo get Gravity Bladed. So, you know, people show it the due respect it needs, but it's honestly a little bit of a hindrance sometimes. So, being a brick and also like it just sometimes doesn't find the value if they're staying above 3 life, you know. So, Kikunojo I also dropped down by 1. So, The next deck, the Rebirth. This is when I really felt like I got a list that felt powerful, but it just wasn't there yet. So it wasn't my final list. What I did was I dropped the Gadatsu, I replaced it with Monkey D. Luffy, Rocket Luffy, which is a very strong card, because I don't know if you remember long ago when earlier in the video I was talking about how I've been having difficulties with card draw because Robin has to burn a card each time she wants to use leader ability. So your hand gets very diminished, and then you also want to counter early on. So getting the card draw out of Luffy is very important. On top of that, most matchups you're going down to 2 life in maybe 3 or 4 interactions pretty consistently. So generally, it'll always be a useful effect. You won't really have games, unless you're against Blackbeard, for instance, where you're really threatened early on and you can't use your Rocket Luffy power. And if you have the Rocket Luffy in hand, there's really, especially against Doflamingo, there's no reason not to go down to 2 life pretty early on just so you can get this option for KO. Yes, it's only 2, but combined with Nami and Onami can really hard control a Doflamingo. And this is when I really felt like my deck list came into fruition against Doflamingo. And then on top of that, if you notice over here, I added Sanji, 4 cost, 5k body, with a trigger to actually play the card if you trash a card. Which, yes, you have to trash a card to be able to play it, but having the extra blocker and the swinger against Doflamingo was very important. And this is finally when I feel like I was having a good time against Doflamingo. Unfortunately, in locals, did not see Doflamingo that much after this. A lot of Shanks, a lot of Bonnie, things I did not want to see at all. A couple BYs as well. So, didn't see the most success out of this list, but honestly, it was a great move towards in the right direction. I'm still running 2 Kikunojo, so a little bit more spicy of a list. But you'll see it does narrow down a little bit afterwards. I did experiment with 3 Gum Gum Giant in this particular iteration, but missing 1 Gum Gum Giant turned out to be more of a big deal than I thought, because you need the card draw. I know, it's so weird to be using Gum Gum Giant for card draw, but that's what happens when your leader really doesn't have that many options for it. So, besides that, not too many changes, just the Rocky Luffy and the Sanji, and I feel like you really rounded out this list pretty well. So, this is right before the final iteration of the list. So what are my problems coming from this list? Well, my problems are, if I don't see top end, the game's over. So this happened a couple times where I just fully brick and I don't see any of my aces, my Yamatos, my Katakuris, or even my Sanjis, and I just had a terrible time. Like, there's a lot of times where I'm just not going through my deck enough, and like if they all get stuck at the bottom of the deck, well, that's probably game in some of the harder matchups. Maybe some of the easier ones I can kind of survive out, but I really need the HP to be able to stall out some of these games, considering I'm playing a little bit more of a control style. The next one is obviously getting rid of big bodies was something I had to give up to focus on winning versus Dofi. You know, I'm only running 2 Raigo/Kingdom Come, which is now banned, so you can't run it anymore. Just to be able to beat Dofi, I have to run things like Nami, Luffy, Onami, stuff like that, just to be able to survive the onslaught of the Dofi, as well as a bunch of blockers. And I just had to give up winning against Shanks and Bonnie, to be honest. And also, occasionally Blackbeard and BY, you know, stuff like that can be pretty tough. But that was also another problem that I had. Losing dice roll also felt terrible. I didn't have a great even curve. You know, you go from 2 to 4, and then 4 you scale 1 Dawn, so you go at 5, so then you end up at 7 the next turn. Then you scale another, you end up at 10, which sounds okay, because you're at 10 at turn 4. But you don't have the best plays at 7 or 10, if that makes sense. Because unless you somehow saved enough cards to be able to run Yamato Gum Gum Giant on the first turn you hit 10, oh, dude, it feels terrible. So generally, when I go even, I just try and play out a bunch of blockers and try and survive to be able to get to my 10 Dawn fairly reasonably. So, yeah, that definitely was something that I noticed a lot. Was like, oh, I lost dice roll. Ooh, this is going to be rough. And then running out of cards early when countering. So I was like, well, I need to fix this card draw problem, because I can't. If I have to counter out just to survive, I need to have some way of returning some of those cards to my hand. So I had a bunch of problems in front of me, and what my 2 biggest things is I need some more card draw to be able to see my top end or counter, and then also my even curve is terrible. Well, turns out there's a card that's perfect for that, and it's called Miss All Sunday. So I had to look through every trigger. I was on like an airplane, and I was just reading through every trigger that exists in purple and yellow. I know, crazy good use of my time. And then I landed on this. You know, you get to add up to 1 card from your Dawn deck and rest it. So that's the scaling. And if you have 6 or more Dawn cards, you draw 1 card. So very good effect. You also have a trigger to play this card on Dawn -2, which is effectively only Dawn -1 because you add 1 back, and then you play the card, and then you get a card. So it's actually still pretty good on trigger, but I'll get into why I messed up with this card once, and it cost me the game. Either way, let me talk more about why this card's cool. So on your if you're going odd, so yeah, this solves my odd problem a little bit. If you're going on your odd curve, you can basically use this on your 6th Dawn turn to draw a card and scale a Dawn. Now, if you think about Robin, you want to hit 9 Dawn on your 3rd turn. So you're going 1, 3, 6, 9. So your 4th turn, excuse me. Now, if you do Miss All Sunday on your 6th Dawn turn, you scale the Dawn for free. You don't have to burn a card. So effectively, this card is giving you 2 cards in hand. You're getting the card from just drawing, and you're getting the card you didn't have to burn. So that makes it really good on odd curve, and I found it to be extremely influential against Shanks, because Shanks, the biggest thing is you don't have enough counter to be able to survive some of the bigger bodies while you're trying to remove them later on. But if you have 2 extra cards in your hand, suddenly it can be winnable. So as I got a little bit later onto the format after adding this card, I was mulliganing mostly to just find either Miss All Sunday or Kingdom Come. And if I find either of those against Shanks, I feel a lot better about how the game's about to go. Now, let's get into the complicated part. I screwed up one of my games very heavily against, I believe it was a Lucci? Maybe it was a Lucci. Maybe it was a Smoker. I think it was a Lucci. Basically what happened is I got Miss All Sunday on my last life. And I'm at 10 Dawn. And I had just gum-gummed. So a bit of a misplay on my end, but I gum-gummed, I drew the card, I played out the trigger because I was like, oh, having an extra card in hand would be great. Which is true, I would love to have the card in hand. But the big issue that arose was now I was sitting at 7 Dawn because you Dawn -1 with the effect. Or you Dawn -2 with the trigger, you draw 1 Dawn back. So now I'm at, let's say I was at 10 Dawn, now I'm at 9. And then I gum-gummed, so I'm at 7. Which means next turn I'm at 9. And guess what I had in my freaking hand? 2 aces that I drew from the Miss All Sunday and then my next turn draw. I lost the game right there. I had no options left. I could not play out the ace that would have saved the game. And probably won me it. But that was a crucial lesson that you need to learn. You know, that's the kind of small stuff that you don't really think about when you're in person trying to grind out. And then, you know, you lose a game you shouldn't have. So, yeah, a little bit rough there, but honestly, good learning experience. So I still enjoy this card despite that. That was more of a misplay on my part. So, the end. The final deck list of OP09 for Nico Robin for myself is this list. So, you're going to see some interesting changes here. There's most notably, obviously, Miss All Sunday. I only put 2 in the deck. You know, I'm a believer, but you don't need more than 2 because the Dawn +1 doesn't really matter. And if you're mulliganing, particularly for this card anyways, you know, you have at least a more decent chance of finding it. And then obviously, another card that is here is Charlotte Linlin, 9 drops. So this is the one that you can trash 1 card from your hand, and then you get to add 1 life from the top of your deck. It also Dawn -1, so be a little careful when you're using this plus Gum. And then you can choose to put a 6 cost or less in the opponent's life, which is again very good into stuff like Doflamingo, Buggy, Bonnie, because you get to put Cavendish in life, or you get to put Carrot in life. Stuff like that is very impactful. So that's why I added that to the deck. You'll notice like some of the numbers have been tweaked a bit. Like Shirahoshi went down 1, and Raigo went down 1, because as I said in the last slide, I kind of gave up on Shanks and Bonnie as a matchup. So I just decided, well, I'll have the one kingdom come in case I really need to win, and I'll mulligan every single time to try and get a Raigo for the Shanks matchup. Um, but, at the end of the day, it's still very difficult, so having it at 1 doesn't change too much compared to 2. And then, yeah, Charlotte Linlin very much rounds out the comp where you can, or not comp, I said comp like in playing League of Legends, rounds out the list to kind of provide a bit more structure on the top end. So I have a lot more options, and this list was phenomenal for me. I almost won a couple locals. Unfortunately, some misplays here and there did cost me it. But that could have freed me from my Nico Robin. Just kidding. I love Nico Robin. I don't really mind. But I did say I'll experiment with other decks after I win a locals scene with this. Now, I'm in a pretty competitive area with being in LA and all, so winning like a 20-person local has been pretty difficult. But I think that's a good thing for me. I'm getting a lot of good practice in. But yeah, this is kind of where the list landed, and I feel pretty good about it. Sitting at 2 Nico Robin, which I didn't really talk about too much, but I think if you have more than 2, you don't find too much use of it in the game because pretty much it's only useful once you get someone down to 3 life, and with Banish, you're generally swinging pretty big with your leader, and they'll sometimes just take it because they don't want to burn that many cards in hand. And that could put them at a lower HP to not be able to play multiple of these Robins in one game. So really, it's just a fun tech option that I think does apply some pressure when it is useful. But I'd much rather be playing blockers most of the time in the early game, or any of my removal options. So, the amount of times I burned this card for Nico Robin effect was very often, because also I want to keep them at high life for the Yamato. So pretty interesting, but I still stayed at 4-2 for my counter events. So I do have quite a bit of bricks in hand, but there are a bunch of counter events here, and then Gum Gum obviously can draw pretty hard. So I felt pretty comfy with this one, and yeah, that's kind of my list in OP09. That's what I landed on. Now, let's go to the future. I've been memeing that to my friends that Nico Robin is the future. Not really, but I still believe in some point. So I did create an OP10 list, and this is kind of what I'm going to be going into OP10 with. And you're going to notice some pretty big changes immediately because of the ban list in particular. If you haven't seen it before, it's Jinbei, Gecko Moria, Ice Age, and Raigo. Well, Kingdom Come. Those 4 cards were banned, and that changes the meta pretty heavily. Black and Dofi were pretty difficult matchups, I'd say. But I teched pretty heavily for especially Dofi, so it wasn't too bad. But Lucci and Smoker were still pretty hard, if you looked at my matchup chart before. Which is actually pretty fortunate for me. And since Dofi's in less presence, you can remove some of the removal tools for the deck. So that's what I did. And this is the deck. Here we go. Immediate change here. You're going to see up here at the top, we got Jewelry Bonnie, which is a very interesting character. Your turn, so it's not an on play. If you attach a Dawn, if a card gets removed from the opponent's life, you draw 2, trash 1. So, generating some extra cards in hand. Pretty valuable, I'd say, considering the meta is about to be Shanks and Bonnie. Okay? Shanks, Bonnie, Blackbeard. That's pretty good. That's a very strong card, and I think it will be a staple going forward for Robin. At least to be able to get some sort of draw in your pocket here. And if anything, you can just attach a Dawn and then not swing with it. If you just want the card draw and then swing big with your leader, which I think is a more applicable use case, because this is a 4K, you attach a Dawn, it's at 5K, but this has a banish. So if you banish and then also draw a card, that's really good for your advantage there. So I think that'll be kind of what I'm looking for, especially on a 6 Dawn turn potentially, where I put 1 Dawn on Bonnie and then swing 5. So 10 effectively with leader to draw a card. So that's probably something I'll leverage a bit. Having some extra blockers. Obviously, we get access to Basil Hawkins, which is a 1K 4 cost 5,000 power 1K counter, which if on KO you trash 1 life from the opponent. Very good body, very much in the similar vein to Kikunojo. Which was cut on the last list. I didn't really point it out too much, but yeah, you could see Kikunojo was gone. I made room with it with Miss All Sunday. So, yeah, Basil Hawkins kind of fulfilling a similar role there. Definitely good, especially because of the card right below it. 8 cost Kid, which is an on-play of trashing the opponent's life, and then you also get to mill a card every turn. Well, I guess recycle a card is a better way to put it. Um, and that's kind of what I'm replacing Charlotte Linlin with. This deck, you'll notice, is a lot more aggressive, with some pretty peculiar options, but that's kind of how I'm going. You know, Kid trashes some life. Basil Hawkins is a good sticky body to be able to swing. Bonnie, obviously, also is a swing character. Once you attach a Dawn, and then you can also burn life with Robin. And then finally, we have the most spicy choice of the list, Conqueror of the Three Worlds Ragnarok, which just called Ragnarok. I don't know who's calling it the whole name, but here you can see the actual effects on all these cards. So except for Bonnie, who I'm covering, unfortunately. Yeah, it just says when a card is removed from your opponent's life cards, draw 2 cards and trash 1 from your hand. So it's good filter. And you also have a trigger where you can just draw 2, trash 1. So it's even useful in life, to be honest. Yeah, Kid, you trash 1, draw 1, trash 1. So you get to cycle your hand for anything more important. But finally, let's get into why I ended up picking Ragnarok as my new 2 of in this deck. So I think the most important consideration here is think about what is the meta after the ban list. Yeah, you know it. It's Shanks, it's Bonnie, it's also Blackbeard. Now, Blackbeard doesn't matter too much for this card, but especially Shanks and Bonnie, who I think I'm going to have a lot of difficulty with, this card is very valuable because, yes, it's only KO up to one character with a cost of 8 or less, but it is only 5 Dawn. And it's a Dawn -1, so I don't really care about that much once I'm at 10 Dawn. So what are the main targets of this card? Obviously, 8 cost Kid from Bonnie, and 8 cost Dragon and Rayleigh from, and also Beckman, from Shanks. So I think this card is actually positioned in a perfect place for the meta to really be even potentially a 4 of. If I see these cards enough, I could see myself increasing this card up just to be able to see it more consistently, because dealing with Kid and dealing with Rayleigh is kind of the key to dealing with some of these bigger bodied matchups. Yes, I'm still going to have difficulty with if the Bonnie player is playing 10-drop Dofi and 9-drop Zoro. Yes, I'm still going to have difficulty with both those bodies. But getting rid of Kid means I can swing really big into Zoro if I'm able to survive a couple swings. Or getting rid of Rayleigh means I can just focus my Dawn on getting rid of the Shanks on board, you know, and applying a lot of hand pressure. So I think this is a very valuable card, and it's only 5 Dawn, so I could put 5 Dawn on my leader. I can use a Nami to KO a blocker or something like that on the same turn. So the most optimal scenario is I use Nami to KO something, most notably Rosinante 2 cost, and then use Ragnarok to KO the Kid, because it has no more Rosinante to protect it. I think it's a pretty good tech option, and I think you guys should definitely consider it if you're looking to play Robin for OP10. Yeah. And yeah, that's basically my list. The blocker count has stayed the same. The counters, I did drop 2 2K counters. You're noticing Usohachi no longer fit in this deck. There's just too many things I need to account for. And with, you know, the deck's really slowing down, I think I can afford to drop some of those 2Ks. But we'll see if it comes back to bite me or not. But yeah, that's kind of how the list all comes together now. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. You know, I hope you enjoyed this list breakdown of Nico Robin. I'm pretty passionate about this leader, and I put a lot of time into it. Probably more than I should have for a rogue deck for the most part, but I think I can win a local with it, even in a competitive area like my own. And I think coming into OP10 definitely could take some decks off by surprise, but it's still going to be difficult because the meta ones are the tough matchups, unfortunately. So persevere, stay strong if you are playing Robin. I believe in you guys as well. If you have any feedback you'd like to give me or anything of your thoughts about how you've played this deck, definitely let me know in the comments below. And also, if you like this content, like and subscribe. Just so I know that people enjoy this stuff. Usually I do like openings and stuff, but I wanted to do a little bit more towards the playing side because that's what I'm currently really focused on more than the openings. So I hope you liked it. I put a lot of time into this video, probably more than I should have, but I wanted to make sure it was a full experience to kind of encapsulate where my mind was at when OP09 finished, which was my first set. You know, I started in pre-release of OP09, and I kind of snowballed from there, so I'm pretty happy to be able to deliver this video over onto you guys and, you know, kind of hear my thoughts about it going forward. There probably will be changes to OP10 list, but I feel pretty happy with where they are now, and I hope you guys got some great insight out of it. So, either way, that's all I got for today. So I'm just gonna leave you guys with a classic Golden Gad out.